Hi, and welcome to Deeply Connecting. The idea behind this channel is to help us connect more deeply with God and each other. And today we have Jessica Schwieters, and she is going to share with us one of the paradigm shifts she's had in her lifetime regarding God. So, tell us about that.
Absolutely. The shift kind of came through a couple different things, as they do. It's always layers with God. He's always removing layers because he's kind to not do it all at once. But I was a missionary overseas in the Middle East, and a couple of my teammates were introducing new ideas of God to me that I had never encountered, and I was seeing some pretty powerful things in the way of miracles and signs and wonders and those kinds of things. So things were starting to be shaken underneath me from what I understood about God from before. And so it started while I was on the field, and my teammate started talking to me about the will of God and the sovereign will of God, and like his desired will, or like the things he desires to happen, and that God's will isn't always accomplished, and potentially that, you know, how I had thought was that God is in control of everything, and he decides who gets cancer and who doesn't, and uses that for our good and uses that for his glory, that kind of thinking. But she basically reoriented that thinking and flipped it on its head, and really like flipped me on my head. And it really caused a lot of stirring in my heart, and really a lot of frustration, actually, and wrestle, because I was really not able to understand what was happening, or like have a way to like frame it. It just felt out of control. But then, so that continued on, and I really wrestled a lot through the book of Job, because that's where we get a lot of our ideas of like God is sovereign over good and evil. He's the one that's, releasing the Satan to do all these bad things to Job. So it really, your thought of God is like, well, he can do that to me at any time that he wants. He's going to do that, at his pleasure and his will. So I think subconsciously it caused this distrust of God to start kind of sitting there underneath. But that story started getting changed through conversations, and new perspectives started coming in on that book, and what was Job really trying to communicate, and what was Job's perspective of God. We were experiencing a story written from the perspective of we kind of had an omniscient, or like the reader is like a little bit of an omniscient, because they get to see everything that's happening, and Job doesn't. So Job's perspective is not our perspective, and that was an important thing to remember. But anyway, so that kind of started breaking down this foundation of how I was raised, which was God's in control of everything, and if bad things happen, God willed it, and we need to, do whatever we need to do to partner with him in that. And so, or partner, to just agree with him and believe that he's good, regardless of all these other things that are happening, which is hard. But until I was shown another way, I never realized how much that caught in my spirit, and that never really settled with me. But it wasn't until I heard that it might be that God actually, though he does have great authority and all authority, he doesn't exercise control over us. He doesn't control us. He doesn't give us, or like, he doesn't make our paths like this strict way to go. We have freedom, we have free will, and when I started realizing that it's actually more of a partnership that God desires, that he wants to partner with us in doing, in walking with him, like it made so much more sense. Like all of a sudden, all those catches in my spirit were like, oh, this actually does make sense, that he would want to partner with us, and that because he loves us, he doesn't control us or force us to do anything, and that we have a lot of say. We have a lot of say in how things go, and it's And it's his mercy and his grace and his kindness to let us do that. Because he has authority to interject and be like, I'm taking this whole thing out. But he doesn't. He restrains because he loves. And that's a perfect love, is to not control. So, which brings us to Restoration Farm, which I'll plug here. Restoration Farm in West Virginia. Or sorry, not West Virginia, just regular Virginia, not West, the normal Virginia. But anyway, so after I got back, I wasn't really interested in moving again out of Austin. I landed back in Austin, Texas, and I didn't want to go back, or I didn't want to leave. I was starting to get rooted in and get friends, but my church really challenged me to go to this facility, you could call it that, but it was basically a home where a family that was a missionary couple. They really felt God's call on their lives to help bring restoration to returning missionaries who had been on the field and had maybe experienced traumas and hardships, and they just wanted to help you process through that time. So I ended up going, and I ended up going for about 4.5 months, which is a long time. So I had a lot of problems. But what I gained from that journey being there was just seeing again how much God wants to partner with us. And that one of the things I used to say was, had my parents not gotten a divorce, then I wouldn't have ended up at this point X. But the truth is that I don't think, and so I would always say, God willed my parents to be divorced, because if he hadn't, then I wouldn't have gotten here and been in this specific place. But the thinking there is wrong, because I'm saying that God's desiring something that he's not for. And so he wouldn't go against himself in that way. But the truth is that people make choices. God's involved. He allows us to partner with him or reject that partnership. And in this case, my parents may not have, I won't speak much into their situation, but I don't think my parents' divorce was God's will. And he still could have gotten me to point X any which way he would like, because if his ultimate will is that I end up at point X, that's where I'm going to end up. But the journey is going to look so much different. So I realized that, I think I'm going to get off topic here, so I don't remember how, you might have to call in your editing skills, but basically, if God wasn't calling me to, I can understand that God is no longer partnering or contracting out evil or or causing people to choose sin, but rather he is allowing us to make our choices either in surrender to him or outside of surrender to him. And he is going to work with whatever reign we give him in our lives. He's going to work with that to whatever degree we give him power and control. Well, that's how much he'll take. He doesn't. I don't think he takes more than that. And then, so now when I look at that journey, what I learned at Restoration Farm was just now when I look at that journey, I'm not angry at God for the things that happened to me, because I think, oh my gosh, God willed this terrible thing to happen in my life. But rather, God was dealing with my parents in the midst of those hardships, dealing with two people that were broken, wounded, hurt, and they couldn't figure it out. And that wasn't God's doing. That was just the brokenness of the world. And thankfully, I had him walking with me in the midst of that journey to bring me to point X, or whatever that is. And so I think what I could see from that, see about God from there, the shift of the paradigm was that God is actually for me. He's not against me. He's not contracting out evil in my life. He's not desiring evil things in my life. He's not trying to cause me to fall into sin, but there's freedom in choosing him. When I choose him, that's where freedom is. And that relationship is so much more free than it is restraining or constricting. And so that's kind of how I think I landed there. in this new understanding of who God was.
Awesome. Yeah, it reminds me of an experience that I had where the way that you put it is so much more palatable. but the experience I had where there was a teacher that actually said, there's nowhere in the Bible where it says that God is in control.
Right.
And it made me go on a tailspin. It made me freak out because I'd been taught that God is in control, and so much so that I didn't have responsibility.
Yeah.
Like, if he wants so-and-so to hear the gospel, he's in control. He can let them hear the gospel.
Yeah.
But what I realized through that process is, when we believe that God is in control, just like you were saying, it kind of makes it so that even the bad things that happen means that he
caused it
or allowed it,
mm-hmm.
which is really hard. I mean, oh gosh, like to say that God wanted me to be raped or wanted me to be murdered or wanted my parents to divorce or whatever, it's just contrary to who he is.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that element of is God in control, quote unquote, is such a big thing. I like the example that you gave when we were talking earlier about a parent with their child.
Right, yeah. So a parent in their household, the child regards them as the authority, and they are the authority in the household. But the question is, are they in control? And they're not. Kids don't. They tell them to go to their room. They're running around crazy. Go take out the trash. Later! Like all these things. So they're not in control, because if they're in control, they could make their kids do that. They could force them. And ultimately, they can by force. Yeah. But they don't really have the power to force anyone to do anything.
Right. Yeah.
And then that being reflected on God is like, God, he has all authority, but he does not control us, and he doesn't force us to do any, like he's not in control.
Yeah.
And he's not controlling.
Right. Yeah, he's not controlling. And just thinking about the parent-child example that you gave, like if you were to force your kid to take out the trash, like if you were holding them by the ear mm-hmm. while they had the trash or something, I mean, you're not really getting what you want anyway.
No.
And I think that's how it is with God too. Like if he were actually to control us, he wouldn't really get what he wants.
Yeah, that's true.
Ultimately.
That's really good. And if you've ever been in a relationship that you can't, like, you don't want to force someone to love you. You just want them to love you.
Right.
And so there's no satisfaction or joy. And then it ultimately can't even be called love, because you can't force anyone to love you.
Yeah.
That's not love.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, you already touched on this, but with knowing that God's not controlling, how does that help you connect with him and maybe even connect with other people too?
Yeah. I think I can speak to directly how it helps me connect with other people. It actually helped me connect with other people immediately. One of the things that, and I mean that immediately after I had this paradigm shift, I immediately started seeing how we've all been, a lot of people, especially women, have been taught this thing about how God is, and like how he's in charge of all these things. So this just stuff is happening to me, and I'm just falling into depression and, all this other stuff because this is just happening to me. And this is what God wants me here so I can learn a lesson or something like that, which that's not always completely untrue. There's pieces of truth in that. Like, yeah, in trials, in the wilderness, I think that's a place to learn a lesson. But, like the fact that if we would think that God's putting that on us to cause us to turn to him or to love him, it's like, I don't think that is really the heart behind it. But so whenever I got back from Virginia, from Restoration Farm, I ended up it was crazy. I was like, God, I think you're wanting me to step more into this, but it's how I started to like have these discipling relationships where women who were sharing these ideas of how they were feeling and like what they were experiencing about God, it sounded so much like me pre the paradigm shift. And I was like, oh my gosh, I thought this was just me. But there's a lot of people that think this way and have this wrong view of God. And I just started sharing my stories and sharing my experiences. And it just has shifted some people. And even today in relationships that I have where I'm discipling younger women, I'm seeing that like they also have these kind of barriers or I wouldn't call it a barrier, but like they have a set way that they're understanding God. And so, and our conversations, there's things that are happening. They're starting to shift. They're starting to believe that they can hear the voice of God and like understand his desires for their life and like step into that. And it's a partnership and it's a dance and not like this, like, when are you going to strike me next, God? Like that fear. And it's actually like a true fear of the Lord where it's a reverence because like, I love you and I trust you. And I think there's partnership there. Yeah. It's pretty powerful. So that's one way I can definitely speak into that idea of like me connecting with other people.
Yeah, that's good.
And I feel like every conversation can come back to this. Every conversation about how you see God. And it really does, like, it's very foundational, which I think, as we had talked about before, like, I had these moments of like, how can no one have told me about this? How could I have believed this thing all my life till I was 27, 28? And it's like, I've been following the Lord since I was 9. And I've thought these things about God and had totally wrong thinking. Mm-hmm. It's like, scary. Yeah. But that was just the journey for me, so.
Yeah. One of the things that makes me think of about connecting with other people and how it's helped me is, I think before I had that paradigm shift, I mean, if someone got raped or something, it's like, well,
how do you deal with that?
Yeah, how do you deal with that? I mean, how do you empathize with them? It's like, was that God's will? Was that not God's will? Like, I mean, before the paradigm shift, it's God's will. So it's like, well, God will use this for good.
Yep, that's what I would have said.
Yeah.
And he will. He will. That's
Absolutely.
not untrue.
Yeah.
But it's saying I'm attributing that sin against this other person towards God, when really it's us.
Right.
Like, it is the brokenness of the world that's causing these terrible things to happen. Right. There are two forces at work in our world, which we're very aware of. The scriptures talk about it all the time. Is like, there's the prince of the power of the air, Satan, who has dominion over this world for a time. Yeah. And there's God in heaven, or, the Trinity. And, they're opposing forces, and we can choose to partner with God and battle that darkness and bring heaven down to earth as we're meant to. Like, we're meant to show people, if we're meant to be apostles, or like we're meant to demonstrate the kingdom of God on earth. Yeah. Or we can just partner with like the evil and be like, well, yeah, point it all at God, and like God's getting credit for something Satan did. Right. Just as exactly what happened with Job. Job constantly was like, God's bringing down this fire, and that, because they didn't understand that Satan was at work. They didn't understand there was an opposing force. They just understood that God was all powerful, which he is. Yeah. But they didn't have a real right revelation of who God was. God had to reveal himself later. Yeah. So I just think I think now, like, I would have had that same response, like, oh, God's going to work that out for his glory. You just watch. And he would. Yeah. But that keeps me from empathizing with that woman, right, or that person, or even with the person that raped her. Right. Because that person, God didn't create that person to rape someone else. Right. That person is broken and in need of Jesus. Yeah. It prompts me to pray for that person, and it prompts me to have the same amount of compassion for the woman who was raped, because it's just, or the man who was raped, whatever. But it's like, I think it invites us in more to like